Good afternoon. I'm very pleased to welcome Rosaline Corinthien, the Chief Executive Officer of ENGIE France Renewables. And Rosaline has come here to give us some background, some understanding about the renewable energies, and also to give us some perspective about this very promising industry. So my first question, Rosaline, would be what are the challenges for a low-carbon economy, and what is the role of the renewable energies in this energy transition?
Thank you, Loïc, for welcoming me, and thank you for this question, which is very important, because first and foremost, the main objective is to decarbonize the energy world, which is responsible for 75% of worldwide CO2 emissions. In that regard, power will play a key role as the electrification of usages such as electric vehicles, industrial applications, will contribute to the energy sector emissions reductions, leading to further uses of electricity and higher power demand. If we take a closer look at the power sector, renewable energy will play a key role in replacing fossil fuel-fired assets, which are heavy CO2 emitters. Meanwhile, carbon footprint of renewables is very low. Two remarks to contextualize these figures. These values are generic and depend on regional context. In order to calculate avoided emissions, we have to take into account two characteristics, the production side and the energy mix. That is to say that the main question is, what does my renewable asset really replace? And for instance, in France, we observe that 52% of additional PV allow to reduce thermal production. So that means that every PV kilowatt hour represents around 238 grams of CO2 avoided. The second stake is our resilience and our security of supply by reducing our energy dependency and fossil fuels and ensure our energy sovereignty. The current tragic geopolitical context highlights once more our addiction to fossil fuels, to heat, to travel, to cook, to live somehow. And in power production, the world is very much dependent on fossil fuels. France a bit apart, as our power mix is largely decarbonized with the nuclear fleet. Renewable assets allow us to produce an electricity from our natural resource, that means sun, wind, water, and as such, ensure security of supply. At France level, renewables allow the power mix to be more resilient by diversifying our power production source. The reality is that France, if France's power system was not connected to the European system, our security of supply would be at stake, given nuclear power maintenance.
Thank you, Rosaline. Could you give us some basics about electricity, and especially how it is measured, and also how do electric systems operate, especially wind turbine and solar PV?
Yes, for sure. Actually, to make a comparison, we will take into account 4 parameters to evaluate the electric current. We use the voltage, the intensity, the power, and the energy itself. So electrical voltage is comparable to the pressure of water in the pipe when the tap is closed. That is to say that it's the accumulation of charges in the conductor which results in an electrical potential expressed in volts. The intensity can be compared to the flow of water in the pipe when the tap is opened. These flows of electrons is expressed in ampere. And the power is the product of intensity and voltage, similarly to the power of the water, which is the result of the pressure and the flow. And it is measured in watts, and more commonly it's expressed in kilowatts. And the energy represents the consumption of electricity. That is to say, the power used during a given period. It is measured in kilowatts per hour. And as electricity results from the flow of charged particles, and this flow of electrons produce an electrical current, it is crucial to have a balanced system. So an electrical network must ensure the dynamic management of the generation, transmission, and consumption by implementing adjustments to ensure the permanent stability of the system. Renewable energies are an additional challenge for the grid operators because of the multiplication of production sources that are more or less dependent on sun, on wind. So it is therefore necessary to continuously modulate the different energy injections and add intelligence to the management of the electrical network. If we focus on the generation part, there are several technologies that can produce power. You have fossil fueled fire units with coal, gas, oil. We have nuclear plants, and we have renewable plants. For renewables, we have the solar panels that generate electricity thanks to the photons that are transmitting their energy to the electrons from the silicon layers. And there is a movement of electrical charges that create an electric current. For wind turbines, we work by transforming the kinetic energy produced by the rotating blades into electricity through a generator. And for hydropower use, we have the energy produced by water flowing into a turbine to spin a generator-produced electricity.
Very interesting, thank you. And how has the energy market, how has it evolved over the last decades? And also, what are the incentives for the players to invest in the renewable market? And if you could focus on France for explaining us that.
Actually, the booming of renewables worldwide in the last decade is undeniable. It is especially the case for the wind and solar power. Solar capacities have been multiplied by 4 between 2014 and 2020, and wind capacities have doubled in the same period. The records of new capacities are reached every year, and 2021 is not an exception. It is estimated that 290 gigawatts of solar and wind capacities have been commissioned in 2021 versus 260 gigawatts in 2020. Renewables booming had been largely facilitated by the implementation of support schemes by national states based on virtuous circle to make nascent technologies become competitive and massive. In wind and solar, subsidies have enabled a large-scale deployment, allowing a massive cost reduction. For ground-mounted solar, the reduction cost had reached minus 85% between 2010 and 2020. And for onshore wind, the cost reduction had reached minus 56% on the same period of the time. Now that wind and solar are competitive, subsidies are aiming at providing visibility to investors. They represent incentives to largely invest in renewables in order to reach the decarbonization targets. If we focus on the French use case, we observe that the French mix is particular, with the highest share worldwide of nuclear in the power generation, that is to say close to 70% of power produced. We have a power mix which is very much decarbonized. As a result, France is lagging behind in the development of renewables, as France is the only country in the European Union that has not reached the 2020 target. In 2020, 19.1% of renewables in final energy consumption had been reached in France versus a target at 23%. In comparison, if we compare to Portugal, for instance, Portugal has overachieved its 31% target with 34% of renewable in the final energy consumption. However, it is crucial to develop renewables in France to reduce our dependency to a single technology and make our power mix more resilient. This is why France has decided to reduce its nuclear footprint, and the development frame is the Energy Transition Law. This law sets an objective of 40% of renewables in power production in 2030. The flagship measure of this law is the Pluriannual Programme of Energy, the PPE, that sets priorities in the energy sector and in particular to reach 100 to 112 gigawatts of renewables in 2028 compared to 49 gigawatts in 2017. And to support this ambition, France has implemented support schemes to incentivize renewable development. First, with a support mechanism aiming to bring costs down and make wind and solar competitive. Then, as wind and solar became competitive, France implemented mechanisms providing visibility and stability to producers, a kind of planification tool, allowing France to reach the target. And once these support schemes will eventually come to an end, producers will need to find new ways to commercialize the electricity. It could be through a corporate PPA with a direct power purchase contract on a more or less long term between a producer and mostly industrial consumers. It could be with merchant revenues, that is to say by selling the electricity directly on the power market.
And who are the key players of that renewable energy industry?
Today, the renewable market is dominated by utilities and independent power producers, which represent 87% of investments in wind and solar capacities. ENGIE is one of the market leaders with strong development capabilities, and we want to reach 80 gigawatts of renewables capacity in 2030 in the main major technologies. That means solar, onshore wind, offshore wind, and hydro. We want to reach 22 gigawatts of solar, 32 gigawatts of onshore wind, 8 gigawatts of offshore wind, and 18 gigawatts of hydro power. We are currently witnessing an interesting trend with a very strong and dynamic coming from oil and gas players who are looking to diversify their revenues away from fossil fuels. They are starting to invest in power production assets, in particular in renewable energy, partly through merger and acquisition to grow quickly. Although there are still minor players in the renewables, most European oil and gas majors have set very ambitious targets. For instance, TotalEnergies had decided to reach 100 gigawatts in 2030. BP aimed to reach 50 gigawatts by 2030 and Eni 60 gigawatts by 2030.